as we started the program with this afternoon, Kevin Rudd, the new Prime Minister, in his first press conference, upped the ante on the asylum seeker debate. He says the Abbott plan to turn back the boats risks a conflict with Indonesia. Let's just recall Mr Rudd's words.
I am concerned about Mr Abbott's policy where he says that he can turn the boats back to Indonesia, as he states, and when he states now, more recently, only when safe, and when the Indonesian government says they will not accept such a policy. I'm very concerned about whether, if Mr Abbott were to become Prime Minister and continues that rhetoric and that posture and actually tries to translate into reality, I really wonder whether he's trying to risk some sort of conflict with Indonesia. It's not a good thing. It's a really bad thing.
OK, Alexander Downer is the former Minister for Foreign Affairs under the Howard government. Mr Downer, thanks for your time.
It's a pleasure.
What was your reaction to what Mr Rudd has said?
Well, look, I was the Foreign Minister of Australia for nearly 12 years, and it always seemed to me you want to be pretty careful making party political points at the expense of other countries, and I thought this was a very reckless thing for Kevin Rudd to say. I mean, he professes to having been a diplomat, and he himself was a foreign minister for a year or so, and he was once the Prime Minister before. He should know better than to make reckless comments like that. I mean, after all, to suggest that reintroducing the policy that the Howard government had in relation to turning back these boats to protect our borders would lead to war with Indonesia is simply an absurd proposition.
Well, he didn't actually use the word war, did he?
No, he said
conflict.
He said it would create conflict, and when later, I mean, it's pretty obvious what the wolf whistle here, the dog whistle here is not a wolf whistle, a dog whistle. Excuse me. It's pretty obvious what the dog whistle is here. Because when he was asked by a journalist about it later in the press conference, he repeated that it would. He thought it could cause conflict, initially diplomatic conflict, but who knows where it goes from there. And started talking about what was called confrontasi, a time when there was confrontation between Australia and Indonesia and Malaysia, where people were killed. So, you know, I think this is recklessness and irresponsibility. The man's come back, apparently, because the Labor Party thinks he'll be more popular. But if he's going to behave like that, he'll not last very long, I suspect.
Now, Mr Downer, it is true, though, the Indonesians do not like and have said in public that they disagree with the policy of turning back the boats. Well,
let's just go back 5.5 years when it was our policy.
I'm talking about recently, though.
No, I'm going to explain it in context, though. Let's go back 5.5 years when we actually did implement this policy. We never asked the Indonesians for their permission to turn back the boats. We turned the boats back in international waters. We didn't ever transgress their territorial integrity. What we did was we took the boats to the edge of their territorial boundary, and we would then tell, and I did it myself, tell the Indonesians that the boat was where it was, and we'd left it with enough fuel to get to a particular port in Indonesia, and food and water and so on, and they might like to now take control of it. But we didn't ever breach Indonesian territorial integrity. There's no suggestion of that, and I think the problem with this debate in recent times is that there's a suggestion that we'd actually tow the boats right back into an Indonesian port without them wishing us to do so. That's never been the policy of the Howard government, and that's not what Tony Abbott's suggesting either.
Did you not get did not naval officials actually worry about that particular policy being dangerous to not only to the asylum seekers and the crew, but also to them as well?
Right, well, I don't want to give the impression that you would join the Royal Australian Navy because everything you do is going to be safe. It's a difficult job often for the Navy, as it is for the Army. If you join the armed forces, there are risks involved. But the second thing I'd say is that this is their job. the job of the Navy is to protect our borders.
So it's
And the Navy didn't ever come crying to the Howard government saying, "Gosh, this is a bit scary and a bit dangerous." I don't think it was, terribly dangerous in the sense that they're not going to be open fire on or anything like that. There's no suggestion of that.
So when senior naval officers say they think it is dangerous for their own people, we dismiss that?
Right. I mean, I don't think when I hear somebody in the Navy saying protecting Australia's borders could be a bit dangerous, it seems to me quite an ironic thing to say. I mean, you don't join the Navy or use the Navy because the situation's safe. You don't send a Manly ferry to do those sorts of jobs with a civilian-trained crew. You send naval vessels, and you send naval vessels to do difficult things. That's what we built. That's what we have a Navy for. First and foremost, it does many things, the Navy, but first and foremost, it should protect our borders. And during the Howard years, it did.
How many times, Mr. Downer, over that period did you actually send boats back like that?
And that is a great question. I think the answer to that is 7 times.
Yeah.
And that was all we needed to do. Well, plus, by the way, there was the Tampa affair, you'll recall, when we refused to allow the Tampa to unload those people on Australian soil. So you don't have to do it a lot. All you have to do is send the people smugglers a very simple message, and there is no way people are going to land in Australia using that method.
Okay,
no way. It's not going to happen.
So, Mr. Downer, when Mr. Abbott says we will turn back the boats and then puts in brackets when it is safe to do so, that when it is safe to do so is a bit wimpy. Is that what you're saying?
No, I mean, obviously you're not going to do it if it's dangerous, and you're going to people would drown or people would die as a result. I mean, all he's saying is what we said during the Howard years.
But if a captain of a naval vessel says over the phone to the Prime Minister in the lodge on a Saturday afternoon, I think it is dangerous, would you necessarily accept that, or would you say, as you said before, it's your job? It's your job. Go and do it.
Dangerous for whom? You mean dangerous for the Navy?
Well,
my view is the Navy does. It depends what they mean by dangerous. I mean, the captain wouldn't ring the lodge. I mean, the captain would have to make the
know what I mean.
Yeah. On the I was about to say on the ground, but then on the sea, on the ship, he'd have to make the decision himself. I mean, obviously, if there were circumstances where he judged it was impossible to do it, it would be impossible to do it. That's true, but in normal circumstances, we did do it. I mean, I think the problem with this debate, that it's impossible or it's too scary for sailors in the Navy or whatever it is. The problem with that argument, which is what the Labor Party's been serving up to people, is that we've proved that's not true already.
But there are senior naval officers who do say it is dangerous. And we can't just I don't know. You can dismiss them. You can dismiss them, but I wouldn't necessarily dismiss a senior naval officer saying it's dangerous.
Well, what do they mean by it's dangerous? I mean, dangerous for the Navy, for the sailors and the ship, or dangerous for the people smugglers, or dangerous? Look, I think. I'm not sure that it is especially dangerous. It's not dangerous for the Navy in the sense that, going to war with another country and having missiles fired at you.
But you would understand, obviously, if an asylum seeker boat, if the captain, say for instance, sank an asylum seeker boat in front of an Australian naval vessel, of course Australian naval personnel will try to save those people, and they may in fact risk their lives to do that.
Right. Well, yes, they'll obviously say that. I mean, I think a lot of this language, it's extremely extravagant. I mean, if you're on a naval vessel... Well, let me just explain. I don't think it is. If you're on a naval vessel and another vessel, it doesn't matter whether it's an asylum seeker boat or something like that, it doesn't matter what it is, another vessel sinks just near you, and you save the people from that boat. I wouldn't call that extremely dangerous. There may be some risks involved.
Of course there's risk involved.
But it's not hugely dangerous to save people, typically.
Well,
there could be a circumstance in a hurricane when it would be, but typically. Now,
it's awfully easy for us sitting in Adelaide and Melbourne saying it's very easy to rescue people in the water off the northern coast of Australia, Mr. Downer.
I'm awfully sorry to disagree with you about this.
You can disagree as much as you want.
or you disagree with me, it's fine. But look, the point I want to make is it's not the Navy. You don't use the Navy to do easy and safe jobs. Why would you spend billions of dollars building and buying ships and submarines just to do, run-of-the-mill work? They are meant to protect our borders, and if that involves risks, then those risks should be taken, because we do need to protect our borders. And the problem with this country is for 5.5 years our borders have been unprotected.
Okay, and just finally, we do have to wrap it up, Mr. Downer, but should we take notice of the Indonesians when they say they don't want this policy or they don't like this policy? How should we deal with that? Should we understand what they're on about?
No, we shouldn't.
Ignore them.
Because these people smugglers, are taking people very deliberately from their country, from Indonesia, and bringing them against our law to our country.
So therefore we endanger the relationship. Obviously the relationship would sour. So it's worthwhile risking the relationship with Indonesia.
Let me make this clear to you. You don't have to agree with everything somebody does to have a good relationship with them. I think it's much better to have a strong and respectful relationship, as the Howard government did have with Indonesia. No, they didn't agree with us turning back the boats, but they couldn't do anything about it because we didn't transgress their territorial sea. We didn't go into Indonesian territory. These were boats. We all know what this trade is about. These were boats that were coming to Australia without our permission and without our approval from Indonesia. Now, they ought to be doing more to stop this trafficking into our country happening. And one of the reasons why that's not happening, let me say, isn't necessarily because the government of Indonesia doesn't want to help, but because there's so much corruption involved. The Indonesian police are being bribed, and in the long term, long-term bribery is going on there. I don't think we have to accept that.
Okay, Mr. Downer, don't always agree with you, but it is always terrific to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed.